The words I will share with you now come from the great Maya Angelou, and this is entitled, When Great Trees Fall. When great trees fall, rocks on distant hills shudder. Lions hunker down in tall grasses, and even elephants lumber after safety. When great trees fall in forests, small things recoil into silence, their senses eroded beyond fear. And when great souls die, the air around us becomes light, rare, sterile. We breathe briefly, our eyes briefly see with the hurtful clarity. Our memory, suddenly sharpened, examines, gnaws on kind words left unsaid, promised walks that are taken. Great souls die, and our reality, bound to them, takes leave of us. Our souls, dependent upon their nurture, now shrink, wizen. Our minds, formed and informed by their radiance, fall away. We are not so much maddened as reduced to the unutterable ignorance of dark, cold caves. And when great souls die, after a period, peace blooms, slowly and always irregularly. Spaces fill with a kind of soothing, electric vibration, our senses restored, never to be the same, whisper to us, they existed. They existed. We can be and be better, for they existed. I never met my father's father, my paternal grandfather. He passed away shortly after I was born, and it's not clear that he ever learned he had a grandchild. It doesn't matter. As it turns out, most things I ended up learning about him kind of made me, most of the time, pretty glad I'd never met him. They told me he was very handsome, although that's really hard to tell from pictures. Pictures from that time, everybody, well, doesn't look their best. Kind of like my driver's license. He was very handsome and apparently pretty generous with his affections, and not too careful of his bride, who was surely wounded by such generosity. He was a journalist with socialist leanings, very intelligent man, a man who had a hard time being still. But he did. He mistreated his family, and he mistreated his children. And after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, when the United States entered the Second World War, my grandfather was too old to, be drafted or to be called to go, but he lied about his age so that he could fight. And he was sent to Europe, a broken man, risking his life to help save a broken world. He left behind my dad, who was probably 13 when the war began, and my dad's younger sister. And my dad became, because their mother, like their father, was an alcoholic. My brother became the man of the house and responsible at a young age for doing everything. He would take his sister to her classes on his bicycle. Now, the story I'm about to share with you, I never heard from him. I never heard my father talk about his dad. I never heard him talk about his own military service. But after the day's work was done, my aunt told me, he would sit on the front porch waiting for his father to come home. Every day. And at first there was some idea, they had some idea of where my grandfather was, but after a while they had no idea. The war, the wars appeared to end, and my grandfather was nowhere to be found. Apparently he was going on a giant bender. But one day, my dad went running into the house and he said, "Dad is coming home today. I can feel it." And sure enough, several hours later, Chuck came home. When it came to be his time, my dad went. It was after the war, but he went to serve in Germany. My mother, they weren't married at the time, went with him, and as it happened, she gave birth to me on the way to Germany, so she stayed in France. He was in Germany. And my brother, who by the time it was, he was at an age, the voluntary draft had begun in 1973, but my brother enlisted and became a ranger. And would tell me after his enlistment was finished that those had been the best years of his life. Broken people carrying on what they couldn't help but carry on. A history of really hard family life, painful family life. But nonetheless, each of them, with all that brokenness, each of them heard the call to put their bodies on the line for something they really believed in. Even though my grandfather was a socialist, he knew what constant war and what totalitarianism were, and he wanted to preserve it, as did my father, as did my brother. As a member of the boomer generation, when the draft ended during my last year in college, where people with that kind of privilege, like I had, to go to, a quote-unquote good school, the young men I knew did not want to serve, and some of them had very strong conscience-driven decisions, but most of them were afraid, because who wouldn't be? And when the draft ended, there was huge relief, but nonetheless, those of us of our generation, of my generation, and I don't mean everybody, but I mean many of us, particularly those of us who were situated in that level of privilege, didn't think about those who didn't have that, and for whom service, whether honorable or not, meant and still means an opportunity for a better life. And there came to be what has been called by scholars of this time period a kind of civilian-military disconnect. And those of us who might have strong feelings about the terrors of war because it took admittedly a flawed father, but a father nonetheless away from his child. It took many hundreds of thousands of fathers. We called them heroes when they came back because they had fought if they came back. But we didn't take care of them. We didn't help them heal. We didn't, for the most part, really give them an opportunity to say or to share what they had lived through. Those of my generation went to Vietnam, as was mentioned during our candles of sharing. And when those who came back, the same thing happened. Suzanne Gordon is co-chair of a policy health directive for veterans. She describes how ever since the Revolutionary War, the cry from legislators in this then young country until now has been the same. There is not enough money to take care of our soldiers. Now, did you ever wonder why those poor soldiers with George Washington didn't have blankets? Not enough money. Not enough money to help them heal and therefore help our society heal. Suzanne Gordon writes how people my age, people in their 70s who go to the doctor who have not been through the horrors of war, we usually come with 3, 4 presenting conditions. But veterans my age of the Vietnam War come with an average of 9 to 12. Now, for reasons that I couldn't begin to understand, in my heart certainly not, but for reasons I can't understand, they're not heroes because somehow that war, which was perceived to be less just, maybe they're never just, but perceived, somehow tainted those who came back. I'm not here to suggest that we not have picnics and go to the great sales that happen on Memorial Day weekend. In fact, many of the earliest commemorations of this day of remembrance included, after the solemnity of remembering, included picnics of gratitude for what had been preserved. And the joy and the gratitude of being with family, if we had all the family back. But I'm asking us as a tradition of faith, what does this say to us? It's not really clear how the celebration started, and most of the time it's been attributed to an event brought about by a famous general of the Civil War, General Logan. But in fact, as Bruce Robinson writes, probably the earliest event after the Civil War, right after the Civil War, that marked the memories of Union soldiers was actually in Charlottesville, South Carolina, where a group of 10,000 people, mostly Black, honored, made speeches, and consecrated the mass grave of 250 Union soldiers who had died in captivity. And after that happened, Black churches in the city, in the town city, reburied all of the bodies in individual graves because they had fought to end slavery. The poppies, I imagine many of you know what the significance of the poppies for the Day of Remembrance. Didn't come to be a national holiday until 1970. The poppies of Flanders Field. I grew up in that field that was so deadly during the First World War. Our faith stands for peace. Our faith stands for healing. Our faith stands for the vision of the world where not only is there peace, but there is actual healing and no need for there to be war anymore. And it may seem impossible, and it may seem like an illusion, but for me anyway, there has to be something we hold and take seriously, because it has to start somewhere. It doesn't start by vilifying soldiers. It starts with honoring each and every one of them, no matter how broken they might have been. Amen, beloveds. Ashe. And blessed be. Will you rise in body or spirit and share with me the closing hymn, number 280?